The television courtroom had never felt so tense. Camera operators adjusted their lenses, expecting another routine small claims dispute. The audience settled into their seats, anticipating the usual back-and-forth drama that made Judge Judy America's most watched daytime court show. But what unfolded that day became the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared over 50 million times across every social platform imaginable. This wasn't just another case. It was the moment when entitled arrogance collided with something that should never be disrespected: a decorated war hero's dignity. Judge Judy's expression of pure disgust said everything that words could not. 78-year-old Robert Henderson sat quietly in the plaintiff's chair, his worn hands folded over a manila folder containing his documentation. His posture was straight despite a limp, a permanent reminder of shrapnel that tore through his leg while saving his platoon from an ambush in the jungles of Vietnam 55 years ago. A small service pin adorned his modest jacket, the only outward sign that the soft-spoken man from apartment 4B was a two-time Purple Heart recipient, a Bronze Star holder, and someone who had pulled 23 wounded soldiers from the battlefield under enemy fire. He hadn't wanted to come to court. Fighting wasn't in his nature anymore. But when Karen Mitchell sued him for $5,000 over a parking spot, the same spot legally assigned to his apartment due to his service-connected disability, he knew he had no choice but to defend himself. Karen Mitchell sat across from him in the defendant's chair, but everything about her posture suggested she believed she was the real plaintiff. Her designer outfit was carefully chosen to project success and superiority. The leather portfolio in her lap held what she called evidence, though Judge Judy's trained eye had already spotted 17 inconsistencies before anyone had spoken a word. Karen's BMW key fob sat prominently on the table, a not-so-subtle reminder that she was a successful real estate agent who believed her status placed her above the other residents of their modest apartment complex. She checked her phone 3 times since entering the courtroom, each time sighing dramatically, as if the entire proceeding were beneath her valuable time. When she walked past Robert earlier, she hadn't acknowledged him, hadn't made eye contact, treating the 78-year-old combat veteran as though he were invisible. That dismissive attitude was noted by everyone present, especially by the woman behind the bench whose career had been built on reading people within seconds. Judge Judy Shendlin had presided over more than 20,000 cases. She had seen every kind of liar, scammer, and entitled person who thought volume and attitude could replace facts and evidence. But this case had caught her attention the moment she reviewed it the night before. A 78-year-old disabled veteran being sued by a woman 40 years his junior over a handicapped parking spot, the very one legally assigned to his unit. The spot he needed because combat injuries made walking long distances painful, and Karen Mitchell had the audacity to sue him for emotional distress because he had asked her to stop parking in his assigned space. Judge Judy spent the evening reviewing Karen's history, and what she discovered made her blood boil in a way few cases ever had. Before the moment that broke the internet, before the expression that became 1,000 memes, before Karen's world came crashing down, hit that like button if you support our veterans and believe that respect isn't optional. Subscribe to this channel to never miss these moments when disrespect meets consequences, and the entitled learn that some things are sacred. What you're about to witness will restore your faith in justice and remind you that karma doesn't just exist. It has perfect timing. And sometimes, it wears a black robe. The next 17 minutes would show exactly what happens when someone believes they're too important to show basic human decency to a war hero. Judge Judy's silent response would prove more devastating than anything words could express. The case seemed simple on the surface. Robert Henderson versus Karen Mitchell, a parking spot dispute in their shared apartment building. But it wasn't really about parking. It was about respect, entitlement, and a woman who had spent 3 years terrorizing her neighbors because she believed her success gave her the right to treat others as obstacles to her convenience. It was about a decorated veteran who had given everything for his country, who walked with a permanent limp because he had thrown himself on top of a wounded soldier to shield him from enemy fire, being treated as if his service meant nothing. And it was about Judge Judy, who was about to deliver a lesson in accountability that would echo through social media for years to come. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling, and Karen Mitchell had no idea she was about to become the most hated woman on the internet. Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom with the precision of a blade. Ms. Mitchell, you're suing Mr. Henderson for $5,000. Tell me why. It was a simple opening question, one she had asked thousands of times before. But Karen's response revealed everything Judge Judy needed to know. Karen didn't just answer. She launched into a performance that would have made Broadway actors cringe with second-hand embarrassment. "Your Honor," she began, her voice dripping with fake sophistication that screamed entitlement from every syllable. "This man has made my life absolutely unbearable for the past 6 months. He harasses me constantly about a parking spot, follows me around the building, and has created such a hostile living environment that I've had to seek therapy for the emotional distress he's caused me." The words tumbled out with practiced precision, each one carefully chosen to paint Robert as some sort of aggressor, rather than a quiet, 78-year-old veteran who simply wanted to park in his legally assigned handicapped space. Judge Judy's eyebrows raised slightly, and that first warning sign viewers recognized immediately as trouble, brewing beneath her calm exterior. Karen continued her performance, pulling papers from her leather portfolio with dramatic flair, as if she believed she was starring in her own legal drama. "I have documentation here showing the emotional toll this has taken on me, Your Honor. Text messages from friends where I describe my anxiety, receipts from therapy sessions, even a letter from my doctor about stress-related headaches I've developed because of his constant harassment." She laid each piece of paper on the table with exaggerated care, never once looking at Robert, never once acknowledging him as a human being worthy of respect. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in front of her face, that signature pose that meant she was processing information and finding it severely lacking. "Ms. Mitchell, you keep using the word harassment. Define that for me. What specifically did Mr. Henderson do that constitutes harassment?" It was a trap, though Karen was far too wrapped up in her own narrative to recognize it. "Well, Your Honor, he would knock on my door when I parked in the spot. He'd leave notes on my windshield. He even complained to the building manager about me multiple times. It was constant persecution over something as trivial as a parking space." Judge Judy's expression shifted slightly, a subtle movement that court regulars knew meant she had just caught something significant. "You just called it trivial, yet you're suing for $5,000 over something you describe as trivial. Interesting." Karen's confident facade faltered for a brief moment before she recovered. "I meant the parking spot itself is trivial, Your Honor, but the harassment and emotional damage are very real. This man has terrorized me simply because I occasionally needed to use that spot for convenience, when I had heavy shopping bags or when it was raining. He acts like he owns it just because his apartment number is on the sign." A low murmur rippled through the audience at that comment, or a sound of disapproval that Karen either didn't hear or chose to ignore. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. "His apartment number is on the sign because it's assigned to his apartment, correct?" Karen waved a dismissive hand. "Technically, yes, but these are community parking spaces, Your Honor. I pay rent in that building, too. Why should he get special treatment just because he's older?" That last sentence hung in the air like poison. Judge Judy's expression could have frozen water at 20 paces, but she didn't explode, not yet. She was a predator, and she knew that letting Karen keep talking was the best way to let her dig her own grave deeper. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Judy said, turning her attention to the elderly veteran who had sat quietly through Karen's entire performance. "Tell me your side of this story." Robert shifted slightly in his chair, his voice calm and measured. "Your Honor, I don't want to make a big fuss about this. It's really quite simple. The parking spot in question is assigned to my apartment number 4B, because I have a medical need to park close to the building entrance. I have difficulty walking long distances due to an injury I sustained years ago." He reached into his manila folder with slightly trembling hands and pulled out official-looking documents. "I have a handicapped parking placard issued by the VA, a doctor's note explaining my mobility limitations, and the lease agreement clearly showing that parking spot number 12 is designated for apartment 4B. Ms. Mitchell has been parking in that spot regularly for the past 6 months, despite multiple requests from me and the building manager for her to use one of the unreserved spaces just 30 feet away." His voice remained calm, almost apologetic, as if he felt bad for taking up the court's time with something he clearly viewed as minor compared to what others might be facing. "I wouldn't have minded so much, Your Honor," he continued, except on several occasions I came home from my VA medical appointments only to find her car in my spot, which meant I had to park in the far lot and walk nearly 200 yards with my leg giving me considerable pain. Judge Judy nodded slowly, a softness entering her expression, a rare look of respect for the man's quiet dignity. "Mr. Henderson, you mentioned an injury. Tell me about that." Robert hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with drawing attention to himself. "Your Honor, I don't want to—" His voice carried the weight of humility that comes from a lifetime of service without ever seeking recognition. "I don't want to make this about me or turn it into something bigger than it needs to be. The injury isn't important to the case." Judge Judy leaned forward, her tone shifting, steel wrapped in silk. "Mr. Henderson, I'll decide what's relevant to this case. You said you have difficulty walking due to an injury. I'd like to know the nature of that injury and how it affects your need for that parking spot. Please continue." Robert nodded respectfully, realizing this was no longer a request. "Yes, Your Honor. Back in 1968, I was serving in Vietnam as a combat medic with the 1st Infantry Division. We were on patrol in the Central Highlands when our platoon came under heavy enemy fire from a concealed position." His voice stayed steady, but there was distance in his eyes. The look of a man reliving events burned into memory. "We had 3 men down in an exposed position, and the enemy fire was intensifying. I was moving to reach the wounded when I saw movement in the tree line, an ambush about to hit us from the flank. I managed to get 2 of the wounded men to cover. But when I went back for the 3rd, a grenade landed about 4 feet from where Private First Class Jimmy Chen was lying." Robert paused briefly, his voice lowering. "I threw myself over him to shield him from the blast. The shrapnel tore through my left leg, shattering it, and that's when it happened, the single biggest mistake of Karen Mitchell's life," she interrupted. A decorated combat veteran in the middle of describing how he'd saved a fellow soldier's life. "Oh God, here we go with the war stories again," she muttered. Karen's voice cut through Robert's testimony like nails on a chalkboard, dripping with contempt so cold and dismissive that every person in the courtroom froze in stunned silence. She actually rolled her eyes dramatically and waved her hand, as if Robert's service were nothing more than an inconvenient interruption to her important lawsuit. "Your Honor, he does this constantly," she said. "He uses this whole veteran thing to manipulate people into giving him sympathy and special treatment. It's honestly exhausting." The words kept coming, each one worse than the last, each syllable digging her grave deeper while she remained completely unaware of the devastation she was bringing on herself. "We've all made sacrifices in life. Your Honor, some of us have worked real jobs and built actual careers instead of living off the government and expecting everyone to worship us for something that happened half a century ago." The silence that followed was absolute, so deep and heavy that even the camera operators froze. The audience sat motionless, mouths open in disbelief. The court stenographer's hand stopped above her keyboard, unable to process what she had just heard. The bailiff, a former Marine who had seen more than his share of disrespectful defendants, looked as if he'd just been slapped. Robert Henderson sat perfectly still, his dignity unshaken, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet pain that had nothing to do with shrapnel wounds and everything to do with having his service, his sacrifice, his very humanity dismissed as manipulation by someone who had never given anything to anyone but herself. But the most powerful reaction in that courtroom came from Judge Judy Scheindlin, and it wasn't fury. It wasn't a shout, a tirade, or a slammed gavel. What Judge Judy did was far more devastating. She simply stared at Karen Mitchell, an expression of pure contempt, disgust, and silent judgment that said more than any words ever could. Her eyes narrowed into slits sharp enough to cut through steel. Her jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles stood out along her face. Her head tilted slightly to one side, that unmistakable gesture that conveyed a single message. "I cannot believe a human being just said what you said." The silence that followed lasted only 5 seconds, but it felt like 5 years. During those long, unbearable moments, her face, and that legendary expression of pure revulsion, was captured by multiple cameras from multiple angles, immortalizing the instant for internet history. Karen, incredibly, still didn't grasp the magnitude of what she'd just done. She actually looked slightly pleased with herself, as if she believed she'd scored a point by cutting through what she saw as Robert's sympathy-seeking testimony. She even glanced at the audience with an expression that seemed to say, "You're all thinking it." I just had the courage to say it. She couldn't have misread the room more completely. What might have been comical under other circumstances was now deeply offensive. Adjusting her designer handbag, Karen shifted in her chair and waited for Judge Judy to continue, utterly convinced her interruption had been justified and even helpful to moving the case along. She had no idea that Judge Judy's silence was merely the calm before a storm that would obliterate not only her case, but also her reputation, her business, and her ability to ever appear in public again without being recognized as the woman who disrespected a Purple Heart recipient on national television. When Judge Judy finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone in the courtroom leaned forward to hear it. But that quietness was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, 2 words delivered with such controlled fury that even seasoned attorneys might have wet themselves. "Did you just interrupt this veteran's testimony about how he was wounded saving another soldier's life?" Judge Judy asked, her tone deadly calm. Karen, still utterly oblivious, nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, because I think we need to focus on the actual case here, which is about a parking spot, not about—" "Stop talking." The command came out of Judge Judy's mouth like a gunshot, cutting Karen off mid-sentence. She physically recoiled as if struck. "Stop talking right now before you make this exponentially worse for yourself, which I honestly didn't think was possible 30 seconds ago. But you keep surprising me with new depths of disrespect." Judge Judy's hands were flat on her desk, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Everyone in that courtroom understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just another sharp rebuke. This was personal. A line had been crossed that even decades of judicial restraint couldn't neutralize. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice softening immediately as she turned back to the veteran. The contrast between how she spoke to him and how she'd just addressed Karen made her contempt unmistakable. "Please continue. Tell me about your injury and your service. Take all the time you need." Robert hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the attention. "Your Honor, I really don't need to go into all the details. The important thing is that I have a documented disability that qualifies me for the handicapped parking spot, and I have all the legal paperwork to prove it." Judge Judy raised her hand gently. "Mr. Henderson, humor me. I want to hear about your service. I want this courtroom and everyone watching at home to hear about what you did for this country. Please." Robert took a deep breath and continued, his voice steady despite the emotion flickering across his weathered face. "After the grenade explosion, I spent 8 months in military hospitals undergoing multiple surgeries to repair the damage to my left leg. The doctors wanted to amputate it first, but I refused because I wanted to get back to my unit. I eventually recovered enough for limited duty, but I was never the same physically. I served 2 more tours despite the injury because my brothers were still over there, and I couldn't leave them." He pulled a small folder from his manila envelope. The documents inside told a story that made Karen's petty lawsuit look even more contemptible by comparison. "I received 2 Purple Hearts for wounds sustained in combat, a Bronze Star with Valor for the action where I was injured, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry for providing medical aid under fire during the Tet Offensive." Judge Judy examined the documents with visible respect. Her expression as she examined Robert's service record stood in stark contrast to the disgust that returned to her face every time she glanced at Karen. "And the parking spot." "Mr. Henderson," Judge Judy said evenly, "explain to me exactly why you need that specific spot." Robert nodded, relieved to move past talking about his service. "Your Honor, the assigned spot is only 40 feet from my apartment entrance. When I have to park in the far lot, as I've had to do repeatedly when Ms. Mitchell takes my spot, I have to walk nearly 200 yards. By the time I reach my apartment, my leg is in significant pain. On cold or rainy days, it's worse because the old injury aches badly in bad weather. I have a letter here from my VA doctor explaining that minimizing the distance I walk is medically necessary for managing my service-connected disability." Judge Judy took the letter, read it carefully, and then did something that made the audience lean forward in anticipation. She pulled out a thick folder that had been sitting on her desk since before the case began. A folder Karen hadn't even noticed, too busy being dismissive and self-absorbed. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Judy began, her tone deceptively calm, "while we're discussing parking spots and who deserves what, I think there are some things about your background that are very relevant to this case. For the first time, Karen's face showed genuine concern, a tiny crack in her armor of entitlement. Somewhere deep down, she seemed to realize this wasn't going the way she'd imagined. "Your Honor, I don't see what my background has to do with—" "I said stop talking." Judge Judy's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "You've talked enough. Now you're going to listen." She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch as Karen squirmed in her seat, wondering what was inside. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Judy began, her voice cold and precise, "this isn't your first harassment lawsuit, is it?" The color drained from Karen's face. "In fact, you've filed 3 previous lawsuits against neighbors in your apartment building," Judge Judy continued. "All 3 were dismissed. The courts found your claims without merit and in one case potentially fraudulent." She flipped through the pages methodically, reading each line like a hammer striking a nail. "You sued an elderly woman on the 2nd floor for making too much noise, when building records show she's hearing impaired and barely leaves her apartment. You sued a young couple on the 3rd floor for letting their baby cry, demanding they pay you for your sleep disruption. And you sued the building maintenance worker for harassment when he asked you to stop propping open the security door." The pattern was unmistakable, and Judge Judy laid it out with the precision of a prosecutor who'd seen this kind of manipulation countless times before. "You have a documented history of targeting people you perceive as vulnerable, people you think won't fight back, and using the legal system as a weapon to bully them into submission." She lifted another page from the folder. "The building manager provided a statement that I found very enlightening. Would you like to know what it says?" Karen's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Your Honor, those cases were misunderstandings." Judge Judy wasn't finished. The building manager states, and I quote, "Ms. Mitchell has created a hostile environment for multiple residents, particularly targeting elderly tenants and those who appear unlikely to have the resources to fight back legally. She has repeatedly violated building policies while simultaneously reporting minor infractions by others. The situation with Mr. Henderson is consistent with her pattern of behavior." Judge Judy closed the folder and fixed Karen with a stare that could melt concrete. "You didn't just choose Mr. Henderson randomly, did you? You specifically targeted a 78-year-old veteran living on a fixed income because you thought he wouldn't be able to afford to fight back. You thought you could bully him into giving up his legally assigned handicapped parking spot through sheer legal harassment. And when he dared to stand up for himself, when he dared to document your violations and report them to management, and you decided to retaliate by suing him for $5,000 you knew he couldn't afford to pay. The transformation in Karen Mitchell was complete and devastating. The confident real estate agent who had strutted into the courtroom with her designer outfit and leather portfolio was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling woman whose hands shook as the full weight of her public humiliation crashed down on her shoulders. But Judge Judy wasn't done. She had one more piece of evidence, one that would seal Karen's fate and turn this case into a lasting lesson in accountability that would echo across social media for years. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Judy said, her tone razor-sharp, "let's talk about your so-called evidence of emotional distress. You submitted therapy bills claiming Mr. Henderson's harassment caused you severe anxiety and stress-related headaches." "Correct." Karen nodded weakly, unable to find her voice. Judge Judy pulled out another set of documents, her expression hardening. The tension in the room was electric. "Interesting thing about submitting false evidence to a court," she began. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Judy said coldly, "it's called perjury and it's a crime." She lifted a stack of papers from the bench. "These therapy bills you submitted are dated during the same period you claim Mr. Henderson caused you severe emotional distress. But I had my team do some checking." Karen's eyes widened as Judge Judy held up several color printouts that made her visibly flinch. "These," the judge continued, "are screenshots from your own social media accounts during that exact time period. Here you are on a wine tour in Napa Valley, captioning your photos, 'Living my best life.' Here you are at a luxury spa resort, posting about how relaxed and stress-free you feel. Here's you hosting parties at your apartment, the same apartment where you claim you were too anxious and traumatized to function because of Mr. Henderson's supposed harassment." She flipped to one final page and paused. "And my personal favorite," Judge Judy said, voice dripping with disdain, Is this post from a neighborhood Facebook group where you complain about, quote, the old man in 4B who thinks he's special because he's a veteran, asking if anyone else is tired of people using their military service as an excuse for special treatment? The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Judge Judy struck her gavel sharply, restoring silence. Karen's face had gone from pale to crimson, tears spilling down her cheeks as the full weight of her lies bore down on her. Every exaggeration, every fabricated claim, every smug attempt at manipulation had been methodically exposed by a judge who had done her homework, and who wasn't about to let cruelty and entitlement go unpunished. Your Honor, I can explain, Karen stammered, her voice cracking. Judge Judy raised her hand, cutting her off with finality. There is nothing to explain, Mrs. Mitchell. You filed a fraudulent lawsuit against a disabled veteran, submitted false evidence to this court, and demonstrated breathtaking disrespect for a man who sacrificed his health and well-being in service to this country. But what makes your behavior truly reprehensible, Judge Judy continued, her tone sharp and unwavering, is that you did all of this not out of any legitimate grievance, but because you wanted a parking spot that wasn't yours, and you were willing to destroy an elderly man's peace and financial security to get it. Her final ruling came down like thunder, each word deliberate, final, and absolute, the unmistakable authority that had made her a legend in American courtroom television. Your case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you can never bring this claim again. You're ordered to pay Mr. Henderson $5,000 for the legal fees, time, and emotional distress you caused him with this frivolous lawsuit. You are never to park in his assigned spot again, never to contact him directly or indirectly, and never to speak to him for any reason whatsoever. I am forwarding copies of this proceeding to your building management with a recommendation that they review your lease for violations of community standards. I'm also forwarding evidence of your false statements to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury charges. The gavel came down with such force that the sound echoed through the stunned courtroom like a gunshot. Then, after a long moment, Judge Judy turned toward Robert Henderson. Her voice softened, no longer the voice of a judge delivering punishment, but of a person speaking to another who had endured far more than anyone should. Mr. Henderson, Judge Judy said, her tone softening, thank you for your service to this country. I apologize that you had to endure this woman's harassment, and that you had to come to my courtroom to receive the basic respect and dignity you should have had from the start. You are a hero, sir, and this court recognizes your sacrifice and honors your service. Robert stood slowly, eyes glistening with emotion, and nodded with quiet dignity. Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to park near my apartment and live in peace. Judge Judy's expression softened into a rare smile. You've more than earned that right, Mr. Henderson, and I promise you, Ms. Mitchell will not be bothering you again. Karen was escorted from the courtroom by the bailiff, her muffled sobs echoing down the hallway as audience members watched her go with visible satisfaction. Several veterans in attendance stood and saluted as Robert made his way out, a spontaneous gesture of respect that brought tears to nearly everyone's eyes. What happened next turned the case from a simple courtroom victory into a viral cultural moment. Within 3 hours of the episode airing, the clip of Karen interrupting Robert's testimony had been viewed more than 10 million times across social media. Judge Judy's now iconic look of disgust became an instant meme, shared with captions like "When someone disrespects a veteran," the look that launched 1,000 consequences, and "This is what happens when Karen meets actual authority." The hashtag #YouRespectOurVeterans began trending globally within 6 hours, with millions sharing the video alongside personal tributes to veterans they knew and admired. By the next day, internet sleuths had identified Karen Mitchell, and the backlash was immediate. Her real estate license was placed under review after dozens of complaints poured into the licensing board, and former clients began coming forward with their own stories of her aggressive behavior and questionable business practices. Her apartment building management reviewed her lease and found multiple violations, leading to her eviction within 60 days. She lost more than 70% of her client base as people refused to work with someone who had publicly disrespected a war hero on national television. Meanwhile, Robert Henderson's life changed in ways he never could have imagined. A GoFundMe campaign launched by moved viewers raised over $200,000, to help cover his medical expenses and provide a comfortable retirement. Veterans organizations across the country reached out to honor him at ceremonies he had previously avoided out of humility. His apartment management not only guaranteed his parking spot for life, but also waived his rent for an entire year, as an apology for the harassment he endured. Most importantly, Robert finally received the recognition and respect he had earned but never sought. The case became required viewing in military appreciation courses and legal ethics classes as a defining example of why respect matters and what happens when entitlement meets accountability. If this story of justice and respect moved you, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you never miss another moment when entitled behavior meets its match in Judge Judy's courtroom. Hit the like button if you believe Karen got exactly what she deserved, and share your thoughts in the comments about people who think they're too important to show respect to those who served. Share this video with someone who needs to see what real accountability looks like, because in Judge Judy's world, and in any just society, disrespecting a veteran isn't just wrong. It comes with consequences that last forever.